Hello everyone, and welcome to a little indie 3D platformer called Draid, where we'll be playing as a druid whose name might be Draid. Yes, his name is Draid. Alright. I have 100% of this demo before. We're going to do it again in the interest of just showing off all the things the demo has to offer. It has a perspective very similar to Bug and Bug 2 on the Saturn. The camera cannot really be rotated, at least I don't think so. I haven't found a function to rotate it. I'm sure there are many more appropriate descriptions or comparisons than Bug and Bug 2, but that is just what comes to mind. When there's an enemy, we can jump on it to kill it or take a swing at it. Big full arm swing. I actually find swinging at... Oh! It happens. Sometimes you fall over in 3D platformers. I find that taking a swing is actually significantly easier than jumping on the enemies for one reason or another. But this time around, I'm going to try and jump on more enemies just to see if I can't get a hold of how that works. You can jump in all directions, but the game favors a more rigid movement system than most other 3D platformers I've played. I'm not going to say it controls bad or anything like that. All 3D platformers control a bit different, and it is the case that you naturally adjust as you learn the game's language most of the time. There are very few 3D platformers whose controls I would readily call bad. And most complaints of bad controls in 3D platformers, in my experience, are just people not taking the time to appropriately adjust to what the game's putting down. Especially with the unique perspective, though, I can imagine some folks having a bit of difficulty with Draid's platforming. We can double jump, but only after bouncing off an apple, it seems like. I remember thinking that was odd in my initial appraisal of the game as well. Perhaps the most pointed criticism I have toward Draid is that although there's nothing technically wrong with the game much, perhaps that wasn't great. Although there's nothing technically wrong with the game much, it is the case that there's an awful lot of waiting. And when you get to where you're going isn't exactly sufficiently exciting to make up for the waiting. The waiting on apples, the apples being the traditional moving platforms in this instance, to catch up so that way you can finally get to where you want to go is, I mean, no one likes doing that, and there's good reasons why you might have to make the player wait. I don't want to make it sound like you can never make the player wait if there's an artistic reason for it, or it's just something you have to do for the sake of your overall level design. Compromises have to be made. But it feels like Draid just doesn't have that many, I shouldn't say didn't, it's not like I played the whole game. It just feels like Draid doesn't have that many ideas for creative platforming layouts based on this demo. And that may seem unfair, but it is the demo. It is meant to give me an idea as to what the overall game is like. But for example, this right here, there's just 3 boxes blocking a whole big rectangular prism of collectibles. And it's hard to fathom what this room is really for. There's nothing for the player to intellectually engage with in that room. It's just collecting stuff for the sake of collecting stuff. It's not really an obstacle. It's not really anything to it. All right, we killed all the enemies. We got all the baubles. And that means we only have one more level in the demo. I do quite like the art style in between levels, though. It makes me wonder if the developer would be interested in doing a 2D style game sometime, because I do quite like that art style. And if I recall correctly, we're headed toward more of the floating apple platforming up ahead after this 2D bit. It feels a lot more natural to control the game when it switches to 2 dimensions. Don't get me wrong, I love 3D platformers, but it seems like the camera pulls out to a much wider angle when you're platforming in 2D. And it is quite close to Draid on average, normally. Extra life. And as we fall down, you'll notice the camera won't quite keep up. Like, that's terrifying, that the camera takes so long to scroll back down to us. I feel like that's a genuine issue. That's not like a preference thing, I don't think. I think that that's a genuine issue with the game. It is a cute game, right? And I enjoy looking at it, and I enjoy thinking about the design decisions. The reason I did that curved jump over to the apple, even though it wasn't necessary, is just to show you that, you know, regardless of how it might look, the game controls fine. Regardless of whether the movement is intentionally stiff or not, it controls all right. If I can make a jump like that, the game's controls are perfectly acceptable. And I don't think that there's these grasshoppers on my first round, it's blent right in to the background for me, so I died to them. But now I know better. But yeah, I mean, it is very old Amiga game, I suppose, is what this reminds me of. When you have collectibles just littering the landscape like this for the player to pick up. But the difference is that generally in Amiga games, when there were pickups littering the landscape like that, it was because you found a secret area that you worked hard to get to. And the reward is just an absolute dump of otherwise rare elements to the game. I just walked right into that grasshopper because my brain erased it. It didn't even register that it was there. It just feels like a bit overindulgent, the amount of collectibles and the way they're placed. I do quite like the atmosphere of this section, the way the camera angle shifts, the way your audio is all but blocked out by the falls on either side. You don't really do much in there, but it sounds and looks cool. Also, the usage of apples as a hazard. Repurposing assets in that way might seem lazy to some. I honestly think it's kind of creative to find multiple uses like that. Anyway, here's the apple platforming I was talking about. You might think that we're doing something wrong waiting here. I assure you we're not. I know it was a long wait. And another wait. I feel like the apples could have been sped up to make this a less laborious process. Like, as you've seen, I missed a green gobble. I'll have to go back and get it. I'll have to remember it's there. As you've seen, the platforming works fine. You have quite good control over the character. So I think speeding up the apples would be perfectly reasonable to make things more exciting. And as you saw, after we finished this rather long apple ride, long by an action game standards at least, when we got over there, there wasn't much to do or see. It wasn't really worth the wait. It wasn't worth the line to the attraction. And that's, you know, that's the thing. It may sound silly, but that is why people wait through long lines, is because they feel like there's a worthwhile attraction. But, for example, with this section, you can see back there where we're headed. It's nowhere special. But on the way there, it's all lines. It's just lines the whole way. Like, you might go so far as to say the lines are supposed to be the attraction. And it just, I don't know, just speed up the apples a bit. It's not like it's a maze either. If it were a maze, absolutely I would understand. You could still speed it up if it were a maze, but... And then on the way back, it's kind of difficult to see where you're supposed to be headed because of the camera perspective and how close the apple moves to the camera. Couple leaps of faith. Now, you could say maybe the idea was to have memorized the apple's movement on the way, but I don't think that's intentional. I don't think that's an intentional piece of design. And it's really cute, don't get me wrong, that the developer was like, this is the moving apple bit of the level. He gets the idea that, I shouldn't say he, I'm sorry, I don't know this person's preferred pronouns, but the developer gets the idea that you want to segregate the level by its ideas and introduce new concepts to the player across the playtime. Mario does that. Practically all 3D platformers that aren't super open do that. It's usually something you see in more arcadey platformers, like the 2D Mario games or again, old Amiga titles and such. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's kind of cute. Like, we had that relatively open segment at the start, then we moved on. We moved through the Waterfall, which was a brilliant transition, to the Apple section. And we're about to do a whole 2D platforming gauntlet. So the developer had the idea for how to include level variety. You know, you want to include several... Did I die in one shot from that grasshopper? It's fine, we'll go again. Had the idea that you want to include several memorable set pieces in the level, and there's more than one way to make a set piece, and one of those ways is with distinctive gameplay rather than distinctive visuals. Not that this game's visual style isn't distinctive, it's rather blocky, and the unique camera angle used gives it its own flavor. The music is a bit hyperactive in this game, though. It does seem a bit more excitable than the gameplay would suggest is necessary. Oh, I jumped early. I got too excited. There isn't much wrong with this section. Like, I don't feel like it would be fair to ask that it scrolls faster. Because, you know, I've died a couple times, and if I have, other people are bound to have died as well. And there's enough to keep your eye on and enough to watch out for with the inclusion of the collectibles that you may or may not want to miss, that I think it's fair to say that this is sufficiently challenging. Especially since I don't understand what's happening right now. Well, I didn't like that, what happened just there. I would kind of prefer if that happened less, personally. I'm not sure what that was, but I don't think there's much excuse in that. Now, you know, for all I know, there might be a mechanic where you stick to walls and such and then bounce off them, and that's what was happening with that apple. But it would be nice for there to be an animation for that, if so, rather than my character actually just freezing in his animation in place. Again, like this. Yes, please stop. Please. I do feel that that's a bit much, whatever that is. I am interested to see what the rest of the game has to offer, because even though I would call some elements of the level, such as the moving apples and the big empty spaces where it's just a room with a ton of collectibles, I would call those uninspired. But as I was saying, the developer does seem to have a pretty good... The apple moves independent of my character, doesn't it? Yeah, no? It seemed like I didn't go with... We're not going to worry about that apple. I don't want to think about that apple anymore. I miss some of the green gobbles. Anyway, that's Draid. The demo of Draid, anyway. It's interesting. Like I was saying, the developer seems to understand the idea that you should include level variety and unique set pieces to make each stage memorable in its own right, and give the player something new to think about as they play. It just feels like some of the ideas aren't terribly interesting, and I don't mean to be mean, but it feels like they could easily be spiced up by having the moving platforms move a bit faster, or rearranging their layout to require more thoughtful platforming. I'm still very interested in seeing where it goes. It's cute. It's a cute game. Alright, so to prove that I can be taken at my word, we are of course going back to actually 100% the level. There's a secret alcove over here that I missed with a bunch of these glowy green collectibles in them. Which Draid might have told me what these were, and I might not have been listening.